And let me just ask a couple of questions, and I'll yield to my colleagues. And, Mr. Sifton, you mentioned, if we enforce some of the current laws, including the Foreign Assistance Act of '61, as amended in 1964, that might be counterproductive. And I know you know this. The Vietnam Human Rights Act makes it very clear that humanitarian and health initiatives, including the Agent Orange, including the HIV/AIDS, and the combating human trafficking monies that we do provide to Vietnam, are all exempted. The idea is to really hold this country and this government to account in a very calibrated and focused way. So, I think your point was very well taken. Dr. Tong, you do point out that the U.S. laws are very clear towards any foreign government that confiscates the properties of U.S. citizens, and you cite the 1949 International Claims Settlement Act, the Foreign Assistance Act, and the Trade Act, which precludes conferring GSP if a country has nationalized, appropriated, or otherwise seized property of U.S. citizens or corporations without providing or taking steps to provide prompt, adequate, and effective compensation, or submitting such issues to a mutually agreed forum for arbitration. It is beguiling and disappointing that the administration has not used existing law to really aggressively push the interests of American citizens, as you all have so eloquently stated in your testimonies. If you wanted to elaborate on that, I would welcome you to do it. And Dr. Tong, you point out that repeated appeals by Vietnamese Americans for equal treatment have been ignored by the present administration. The U.S. Department of State Legal Advisor's Office, which is tasked with the responsibility of representing U.S. citizens in disputes, has set 3 conditions. You go through those 3 conditions, which have been met by Ms. No, as she pointed out. But then you make a very, very important point that the legal advisor at the state said, contact and hire an attorney in Vietnam to help you pursue any rights and remedies. And as you point out, there is no local remedy, does not exist. I would point out for the record that when I met with Nguyen Dai, a lawyer in Hanoi, who subsequently was arrested, harassed, he was trying to raise simple human rights issues, and for that, the fist of the dictatorship came down upon him extraordinarily hard. This needs to be a government-to-government endeavor, not, here, go find yourself a lawyer somewhere in Vietnam and good luck, because you will not, as you say, there is no remedy. If you could expound upon how, that's just sending people to not only does it put the lawyer and the individual at risk, it is a fruitless endeavor, and I'm amazed that the legal advisor would make such a suggestion.
Actually, Attorney Nguyen Van Dai, whom you had met,
yes,
tried to help a number of cases, and again, the government said no. And not only that, as Congressman
cases of
confiscated properties of U.S. citizens, and Congressman Cao did point out that there's a resolution passed by the National Assembly of Vietnam on November 26, 2003, declaring without any ambiguity that the Vietnamese government will not return the properties that it had confiscated from anyone who had left Vietnam, including hundreds of thousands, potentially, of Vietnamese Americans, period. So there's no point in spending and wasting more time and money hiring lawyers in Vietnam to fight a system that has really declared that they are not going to return the properties. And therefore, that's why we really need intervention of this government. And the laws are very clear. They have been implemented multiple times, including against Vietnam, for claims against Vietnam. How come that when it comes to Vietnamese Americans, the same laws don't apply? And we wonder very much about that.
Let me ask, you mentioned that Boat People SOS launched an online petition to President Obama on the We the People website, and you stated, our President should demonstrate his commitment to defending the rights and interests of U.S. citizens by applying prohibition clauses of the Foreign Assistance Act to Vietnam, calling on its government to freeze further expropriations of U.S. properties, and conditioning GSP or any further trade benefits on the return of all properties that belong to U.S. citizens or payment of fair compensation. You say that you collected well in excess of 25,000 signatures within 3 weeks' time, and to this date, there has no response?
There has been no response. 10 months later.
That's
Yes.
appalling. Let me ask the Venerable Don Toll. One of the issues that I've raised repeatedly with interlocutors in Vietnam and with the State Department is, when they talk about registering, and I thought your question was great for tomorrow, Dr. Tong, but as we all know, the Vietnamese government sets up parallel faith bodies. That's why the Venerable Thich Quang Do can't operate anymore, because they just outlawed the Unified Buddhist Church, and then they turn around and set up a shell of an organization that they control. What has been your response, if any, and anyone's response from the State Department in doing this? It seems to me that when we talk about registering and not registering, well, the real issue is that they're setting up bogus organizations to be the faith community for that particular denomination or belief system. Yeah, Dr. Tong?
តាមខ្ញុំគណៈអាត្មាប្រសិនបើគណៈសង្ឃខាងសមាគមព្រះសង្ឃស្នេហាជាតិខាងគណៈថេរវាទនៅដែនដីទន្លេមេគង្គចូលជាមួយរដ្ឋអំណាចកុម្មុយនីសវៀតណាម
I believe that if the registers and the inclusions of the Theravada Buddhism fit together with the United Buddhist Church Association in Vietnam,
រដ្ឋអំណាចវៀតណាមនឹងធ្វើការជិះជាន់យ៉ាងខ្លាំងតទៅទៀតដល់លើព្រះសង្ឃក៏ដូចជាខាងគណៈពុទ្ធសាសនាគណៈថេរវាទនៅដែនដីទន្លេ
I believe that the government of Vietnam will continue to oppress and oppress the Khmer Krom Buddhist monks, never stop oppressing them and oppressing them.
ដោយសាររដ្ឋអំណាចវៀតណាមមិនចង់ឲ្យសាសនាពុទ្ធសាសនាគណៈថេរវាទរបស់ខ្មែរក្រោមនៅដែនដីទន្លេមេគង្គមានការរីកចម្រើន
Another reason is that the government of Vietnam right now just don't want to have the Theravada Buddhism faith in existing in the Mekong Delta.
អញ្ចឹងសូមបញ្ជាក់ថាមានមិនតិចទេព្រះសង្ឃខាងគណៈវៀតណាមខាងព្រះសង្ឃខាងវៀតណាមមានការតស៊ូច្រើនណាស់ហេតុអីរដ្ឋាភិបាលវៀតណាមមិនចាប់ព្រះសង្ឃវៀតណាមនោះចាប់ពិនសឹកទៅហេតុអីព្រោះតែព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រោមតស៊ូដោយសន្តិវិធីក៏ចាប់ពិនសឹក
And another reason I would like to leave here with the committee that there's also demonstrations in Vietnam from various sects of the Buddhist monks, but why there were not any forced defrocks of the Buddhist monks, with the exception of the Khmer Krom Buddhist monks have been forced to defrock and to tortures and to be imprisoned.
នេះជាចំណុចមួយសពបញ្ជាក់ថារដ្ឋាភិបាលវៀតណាមមានការធ្វើបាបមកលើព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រោមមិនចង់ឲ្យគណៈព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រោមមានការរីកចម្រើន
They say to show that the Vietnamese the government of Vietnam just don't want to see the Khmer Krom Theravada Buddhisms continue to exist in the Mekong Delta.
ត្រង់ចំណុចនេះហើយបានជាក្នុងនាមខ្ញុំព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រមមិនចង់ឲ្យឃើញរដ្ឋអំណាចវៀតណាមមានការជិះជាន់អញ្ចឹងក៏សូមទទូចសុំជួយឲ្យខាងរដ្ឋសភានៃសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកជួយធ្វើការអន្តរាគមន៍ឲ្យព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រមមានរចនាសម្ព័ន្ធដាច់ដោយឡែកពីរដ្ឋាភិបាលកុម្មុយនីសវៀតណាម
That's why I would like to urge the committee to help Vietnam respect and then having the Khmer Krom Buddhist monks forming its own independent organizations independently from the government Buddhist organization right now.
ហើយនឹងសូមឲ្យគោរពនូវសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពខាងជំនឿសាសនាឲ្យសាសនាព្រះសង្ឃខ្មែរក្រមមានសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពនិងមានការរីកចម្រើនដោយសាសនាដទៃ
And to respect the religious belief of the Khmer Krom Buddhist monks.
សូមអរគុណ
And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just ask one final question, and then I yield to Mr. Meadows. Dr. Tong, in your testimony, you talked about how, on the heels of the U.S. human rights dialogue, that the violation of human rights actually intensified, It's deplorable, as you put, but not surprising. And you point out, and this is a very important paragraph, in April, a U.S. delegation led by the Department of State was in Hanoi for a one-day dialogue on human rights. It was attended by Vietnamese rank-and-file government officials. 10 days later, a large U.S. delegation led by acting U.S. Trade Representative spent 3 days to negotiate a Trans-Pacific partnership. They met with the Vietnamese president, the deputy prime minister, several ministers, and deputy ministers. The message to the government of Vietnam was very clear. The U.S. cares more about trade, and I would add profits, than human rights. It's all about prioritization, and if any of you would like to respond to that, they are your words, Dr. Tong, but it just sums it all up. They take the measure, they look us in the eyes, and we say, we got to do an obligatory human rights dialogue. Have a nice day. Go and abuse all you'd like. We don't really care, and as you pointed out, up to 500,000 U.S. citizens of Vietnamese origin have had their properties confiscated. That's very serious, plus, of course, the torture and the ongoing repression. It's all about priorities, and I am sickened at heart by the lack of prioritization of human rights towards Vietnam. And as Mr. Sifton pointed out, it is other countries as well. We had a hearing yesterday, 24 years later, and Sophie Richardson from your organization testified, talking about, and Wei Jingshang and some of the great leaders of the Tiananmen Square movement, which continues to this day, as well as the repression. Again, no prioritization of human rights. It's a bullet somewhere on a page. And that is so unfortunate, unnecessary, and I would say deplorable. If any of you would like to respond, Mr. Sifton, then Dr. Tong.
I would like to say that that's exactly the right question to be asking the State Department. All I would say in their defense is that they're not monolithic. The folks that went for that one-day dialogue did raise human rights, and they raised the issues and they pushed the issues, and even Ambassador Scheer pushes the issues. The question is priorities. There are other parts of the State Department which are prioritizing trade preferences and improving all of that. So it's a fight even within the State Department in which I think this committee's and the full committee and the other subcommittee could play a huge role in strengthening those parts of the State Department that actually want to do the right thing. But it might be useful to just focus for a second on what exactly is going on here with the religious persecution. It looks like the government distrusts unregistered groups because they worry that they're politically active and a risk to the party. And they're worried about them the same way they're worried about unions. This is whenever people, without the approval of the government, get together and start organizing, it's a threat to the party. And that's what they're worried about. To get them to not do that is going to require a heavy amount of pressure from outside authority because they really do fear, perhaps very paranoid, but they do fear that unregistered religious groups are somehow a threat to their rule.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Last year, before the publication of the annual report of the State Department on international religious freedom, the director of the Office of International Religious Freedom of the State Department went to Vietnam, met with the leadership of a Buddhist church. And when we asked her, I talked to her, and it turned out that she talked to the leadership of the Vietnamese Buddhist Sangha, which was set up by the government of Vietnam. She did not have any chance to talk to Venerable Thích Quảng Do, for instance. And then she came back, and a few weeks later, the report was published, and clearly the content was very disappointing. And that's why we brought a number of Khmer Krom Buddhist monks who had suffered, witnesses and victims, and we suggested that her office to interview them to improve on the quality and the accuracy of this year's report. Nothing happened. And they are here, available. And I would like to say that your remark, Mr. Chairman, that the Vietnamese government has been very deft at setting up bogus religious organizations to present to the world. And that applies to many religions in Vietnam, including the Cao Dai church, whose representatives are right here. You see those men and women in white tunic right here, sitting right there. They set up a bogus Cao Dai church, likewise a bogus Hoa Hao church, Buddhist church, so on and so forth. So it is very imperative that we talk to the right churches, that are truly independent, that are truly promoting religious freedom in Vietnam, and not the ones that are set up by the government of Vietnam to cover up the abuses against religions. Now I'd like to point out one other thing. Yes, we understand that there's a need to balance concerns about human rights against other concerns, other strategic priorities of national interest to this government, and to the American people. However, I truly believe that defending the rights and the properties, the assets of American citizens should not be trumped by any other national interest. It should be of the highest priority for this government.